So we want to look at alveoli, okay, so, and how we actually get to the alveoli. So this is a blow up, okay, so we're going to go bronchi, okay, and then we would go to bronchioles, bronchioles, and then we'll go to alveolar ducts. And then as we get smaller, we're going to go to alveoli, which that's plural, right? Okay, so here's the bronchiole, okay, as it comes down. Okay, and then as they get smaller, they're going to become respiratory bronchioles. Then we'll have an alveolar duct, and then alveoli. Okay, so the alveoli are the sacs. Okay, so these are the thin-walled sacs that make up your lungs, and they're going to be where gas exchange is going to take place, the most of the gas exchange. So you can see here's the pulmonary artery coming in, okay, and then it branches and becomes arterioles, and then the alveolar sacs are covered with capillaries. So I've heard people say that if you took all the alveoli that we had and spread them out in a single cell layer, you would cover a tennis court. So it's just a huge amount of surface area. And we keep talking about that. So what's the purpose of having all that surface area? It gives us lots of space for increased transport. So it's going to be to drop oxygen off and pick up carbon dioxide. Okay, so they say, I'm looking at my notes, 150 million little sacs. Okay, now we want to talk about the respiratory membrane, and we're going to get there here in a minute. Okay, so structure of an alveolus. Okay, so if you looked at one, okay, it's a sac, and say we cut the front off of the sac. You're going to find several different kinds of cells. Okay, so we'll have alveolar macrophages. Okay, and I have these listed on the next slide, what their function is. So squamous alveolar cells. We're going to have some great alveolar cells. Okay, and these cells actually produce surfactant, and we'll talk about that in a minute. They also have lymphocytes, and then an important concept that we're going to try to understand is this idea of a respiratory membrane. Okay, so the respiratory membrane is the interface between the alveolar cells, okay, and the capillaries. So basically the oxygen is going to pass from here into here, and the carbon dioxide will pass this way. Okay, so there's the little capillaries that they're covering. Okay, and hopefully it'll make sense here, and I'll show you some more pictures. Okay, so more details about the cells. Okay, so the simple squamous cells are also called alveolar type 1 cells. So they are the majority of the alveoli. Okay, so they're the really thin barrier that's going to separate the air from the blood. Okay, now alveolar type 2 cells are sometimes called surfactant cells. And what they do is they actually release a surfactant. So a surfactant is like a detergent. Okay, and the idea behind the detergent is it's going to disrupt surface tension of water. So I want you to think about it. So our lungs they're covered, the alveoli are covered in water. Okay, and we have these sacs. Okay, so there's a sac, and it's lined with water. Okay. Now think about 2 pennies. Okay, so or pennies on a table, and you get water on it. Okay, the penny's going to stick to the surface, right, because of the surface tension of the water. Okay, it's the same thing with the alveoli. Okay, so if an alveoli collapses, okay, and it's covered with water, the alveoli will stick closed. Okay, so it'll stick to itself, and you can't open it up. Okay, so every time you would breathe, it would be like taking your first breath. It would be a big gasp, and you'd have to fill the alveoli. Okay, now, these cells, these alveolar type 2 cells, okay, they make detergent or surfactant that when you put it in here, okay, it disrupts the surface tension. So it would keep the alveoli from sticking. The water won't stick to itself. Okay, I don't know if you guys did the lab with the Petri plate and you put a pin on it and the pin floated on water, and then when you added the soap, the pin sunk. Okay, so that's the same idea. It's disrupting the surface tension. Okay, so most of the time, everyone has surfactant. Okay, now, sometimes in babies, premature babies, okay, if they're born before 8 months gestation, they are not making surfactant. So every time those babies would breathe, they would have to gasp and blow up the alveoli. Okay, so now they have a synthetic surfactant that they give in an inhaler, and that's going to inflate the baby's lungs. Okay, they have to keep taking it. Okay, and think about it. If they know you're gonna deliver early, they'll give you the mama steroid, and that's going to try to trigger the baby's lungs to develop quickly. Okay, now the third kind of cell are alveolar macrophages, and they used to call them dust cells. And basically, these are big macrophages, and they're going to go around and they're going to gobble up any invaders. Okay, so they're part of your immune system. Okay, now the respiratory membrane. Okay, so it's this thin membrane. Okay, so if this is a capillary. Okay, and then this is the alveoli. Okay, so here's the simple squamous cells of the alveoli. Okay, and then here's the simple squamous cells of the capillary. So we have the alveolar epithelium, which would be right here. Okay, and then we have the capillary epithelium and the basement membrane. So really, there's only like 4 layers that things have to pass through. Okay, so oxygen is going to pass through the squamous cell, basement membrane, squamous cell to get into the blood. Okay, and then carbon dioxide is going to go the opposite way. So there's a very thin layer that we have to go over, and that's what the respiratory membrane is. Okay, so here's another picture that the book has. Okay, so if you look here, let me see. If you look here, you can see, okay, here's the alveolar epithelium basement membrane. Okay, so, and then here's the capillary epithelium basement membrane. Okay, so CO2 is going this way, oxygen's going that way. Okay, and this is just another picture. It's showing you the cells. So here's capillaries. Okay, these are the squamous cells. This is the macrophage gobbling up stuff, and then here's the type 2 cell that's releasing the surfactant. Okay, now if we look at the thoracic cavity, okay, the parts of it. So here's the lungs. So you have to remember the right lung has 3 lobes. Okay, so right and tri go together. And then the left lung has 2 lobes because of the way the heart is. Okay, the costal surface is going to touch the ribs. Okay, and the mediastinal surface is going to touch the heart. Okay, and that makes sense too, right, with what you know. And then you'll go over, I took them out, you'll go over the names of the lobes and the names of the fissures in lab. Okay, the apex is the pointy part, and the base is the broad part. And then here's the diaphragm. Okay, so here's the same thing. So I already covered that. This picture has the names of the lobes. It's kind of hard to see on here, so you might be able to see it better in your book, and you're definitely going to go over it in lab. Okay, now bronchopulmonary segments are interesting. Okay, so there's 10 segments in the right lung and between 8 and 10 in the left lung. It can vary. Now what I want you to know about this is that they are autonomous. Okay, so they kind of function individually, and they're wrapped up in their own connective tissue. So you can have them individually packaged, okay? And they have their own bronchi, their own blood vessels. And if someone gets like lung cancer and it is in one of these bronchopulmonary segments, they can actually go in and pull out that segment without affecting the other segments. And usually, because they're individually wrapped with their own connective tissue, okay, they protect the other segments from being, like, the disease doesn't metastasize as fast. So it's like being individually packaged. It's like, I think, a Sam's Club, right? And or Costco or something, and when you buy individual packages within a package that's already wrapped. Okay, so the lungs have their pleura, right? But then there are individually wrapped segments within that pleura. Okay, there are also lobules, and they each have a terminal bronchial, arterial, venular, and lymph vessels. Okay, now the pleura, these are the serous membranes around the lungs. Okay, so serous membranes secrete serous fluid, and the idea of serous fluid, it serves as a lubricant. Okay, so it's going to reduce the friction of your lungs rubbing against your chest. Okay, so when you breathe, you don't feel your lungs rubbing against your heart or your ribs. Okay, so there's the visceral pleura, which lays right on top of the lungs. The parietal pleura is outside of it. It lines, we say the parietal lines the thoracic cavity. Whoops, thoracic cavity. Wait a minute, I can erase. Thoracic cavity. The space in between here is called the pleural cavity, and that's where the fluid is going to be. Okay, so I have it written out. So it reduces friction. Okay, now it's also going to create a pressure gradient. Okay, so there's going to be a lower pressure in this parietal or pleural cavity than there is in the lungs, and that's going to help our lungs stay inflated. Okay, now it also is compartmentalization. So by having, like, your lungs are exposed to the outside, but your heart isn't. Okay, so you could get pneumonia, you can get bronchitis or bronchiolitis, right? But you don't want it to go to your heart. So this is going to protect your heart and the rest of your body from what could be in your lungs. Okay, one more thing. Okay, and you guys see the diaphragm. You know where the diaphragm is. Okay, so it's out below the thoracic cavity. So I think I got everything there. Oh, pleurisy. Have you ever heard of pleurisy? So pleurisy, this is inflammation of the pleura. Okay, and it's supposed to be really, really, really painful. Okay, so you do feel every breath. Okay, now, how do our lungs stay expanded? Okay, so if you think about our thoracic cavity, okay, and the way that it's designed, okay, the ribs and the muscles, what happens is the chest cavity always wants to expand. Okay, when it's at rest, it wants to be big. Okay, and then what happens is the lungs cling to the internal surface of the thoracic cavity. Okay, so they stick to it. Okay, now the lungs are made up of elastic connective tissue. Okay, that when they're stretched, they want to recoil. Okay, so the interpleural pressure Okay, so the intrapleural pressure, so this pressure out here is lower than the pressure in the lungs. Okay, so because this is lower out here, okay, oops, this should be minus. Those are supposed to be minuses. The lungs stay inflated, okay, because the pressure in the lungs is higher than it is in this space outside the lungs. Okay, now what can happen is if you get stabbed, okay, or something happens to your thoracic wall, okay, so say you get stabbed, okay, this pressure is going to equalize, okay, and your lungs will collapse. So if you lose the negative intrapleural pressure, lungs collapse.